You're not being rejected because you're wrong. You're being rejected because you're right. You arrive early. You learn fast. You don't complain. And in just a few weeks, you're outperforming expectations. Your manager smiles, your results speak for themselves, and yet something strange starts to happen. People stop talking when you enter the room. The invitations dry up. You feel a tension that no one names, but everyone feeds. No one attacks you. They just quietly pull away. You tell yourself you're imagining things, that maybe they're just busy. But then a joke is made in a meeting, subtle, offhanded, but it lands like a dart. And suddenly, you realize you're not being praised for being good. You're being resented for being better. If you've ever experienced this, being silently punished for doing your job well, this video is for you. Because we've been told that the workplace rewards competence, that if you work hard, deliver results, stay humble, people will respect you. But the truth is much more complicated. In many environments, being smart isn't just uncelebrated, it's threatening. Machiavelli understood this over 500 years ago. In his ruthless analysis of power, he warned us, people don't fear strength they can measure. They fear what they can't predict. And in the politics of modern workplaces, intelligence is often the most unpredictable force of all. Why? Because it disrupts comfort. It exposes weakness. And worst of all, it doesn't need permission to shine. This is why people who are genuinely intelligent, competent, and composed often find themselves slowly isolated, misread, or even quietly undermined. Not because they're arrogant, not because they're antisocial, but because their very presence changes the emotional temperature of the room. So in this video, we'll explore why intelligence can become a social liability in corporate spaces. We'll dive into the silent rules of group survival, the psychology of envy, and how Machiavelli's brutal truths can help you navigate a world that doesn't always reward merit. We'll also look at how to remain authentic without self-sabotaging your strengths. Because being smart shouldn't mean being alone. But to avoid isolation, you need to understand the game you're in. And the game isn't about truth. It's about comfort. Let's begin. The silent punishment of competence. You were taught that excellence would protect you, that if you just focused on doing the work without drama, without ego, you'd rise. But in reality, performance alone doesn't guarantee security. Sometimes it guarantees resentment. Why? Because in a group setting, especially one built on unspoken emotional contracts, your competence isn't neutral. It's comparative. And the moment you start to exceed expectations, you don't just change how others see you, you change how they see themselves. Your precision becomes someone else's anxiety. Your speed becomes their shame. Your ideas become a mirror they never asked to look into. And here's the catch. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't brag. You didn't sabotage. You simply did your job better than what was safe. And that's the unspoken rule you broke. In many work cultures, especially where mediocrity is normalized, you start hearing things like, "You're trying too hard. You're making the rest of us look bad. You think you're better than everyone else, huh?" These aren't comments about your behavior. They're confessions. They reveal a deep discomfort not with you, but with what you represent. You represent effort in a place that's gotten used to autopilot. You represent clarity in a space that thrives on confusion. You represent accountability in a culture that protects comfort. This is why many high performers feel they have to downplay their strengths. They learn to act normal, to leave part of themselves at the door. Not to protect their job, but to protect their peace. And this is what Machiavelli meant when he said that a threat is not always an act, it can be an existence. People don't need you to attack them to feel unsafe. They only need to see that you don't need their approval. Because the person who doesn't rely on flattery, politics, or popularity to survive is the person who scares everyone playing that game. Machiavelli and the fear of invisible power. In The Prince, Machiavelli wrote, "It is not enough to be strong, one must also appear strong." But what he didn't say, at least not directly, is this: Those who are strong but choose not to show it often inspire more fear than those who boast. Why? Because the mind fears what it cannot measure. This is the psychology behind why quiet intelligence makes people uneasy. When someone is loud, political, or dramatic, they're predictable. You know where they stand. You know what they want. You know how to handle them. But the quiet one, the one who listens more than they speak, who observes but doesn't rush to impress, who performs well but doesn't advertise it, that person becomes a problem. Not because they cause disruption, but because their strength is unspoken. And unspoken power is dangerous in any hierarchy. In the workplace, where social dynamics often matter more than results, your silence becomes a canvas. People project onto it. They imagine motives. They fill in blanks with fear. Why doesn't she ever talk in meetings? Why does he always finish his work early? What's she really thinking when she looks around the room like that? They don't have answers. And the lack of certainty makes them uncomfortable. Machiavelli would say, you've become the unknown variable. And nothing is more threatening to a system built on control than a player who doesn't signal their next move. This is why intelligence, especially when combined with emotional restraint, can feel like a challenge to authority. You're not trying to lead, but you're not following either. You're simply present, observing, processing, holding space. And because you don't need attention, those who do feel invisible next to you. That's when it begins, the quiet campaign. Not of open conflict, but of subtle distancing. You're excluded from decisions. Your input is ignored. You're painted as cold or detached. But it's not personal. It's Machiavellian. Because in a world where power is often an illusion, the person who doesn't need to perform becomes the most dangerous one in the room. Envy is survival, not morality. We like to believe that people are fair, that if you're kind, humble, and competent. But fairness isn't the operating system of the human brain, survival is. And envy, as uncomfortable as it sounds, is one of its core functions. Envy is not just jealousy. It's the emotional alarm system that tells us when someone else's success might cost us something: status, recognition, opportunity, or identity. In the workplace, envy doesn't always show up as sabotage. It often shows up as subtle withdrawal, as eye rolls during meetings, as delayed emails, as being left out of loops you should be part of. That's because the brain, specifically the amygdala, responds to status threats the same way it responds to physical danger. It doesn't ask, is this person good? It asks, does this person make me feel less valuable? If the answer is yes, it reacts. Not with reason, but with defense. That's why people can dislike you without you doing anything wrong. Because your presence alone forces a reevaluation of their worth. And if they can't meet you, they'll try to shrink you. They'll gossip. They'll downplay your accomplishments. They'll call you too ambitious, robotic, socially awkward. These aren't critiques. They're coping mechanisms. You represent a version of themselves they're not ready to face. And instead of rising to the challenge, they lower the frame, not because they're evil, but because they're wired that way. Even Machiavelli, as cold and calculated as he was, understood that humans act more from fear than from admiration. People fear being outshined more than they crave excellence. That's why you rarely hear, "She's great at what she does, I should learn from her." You hear, "She's trying too hard." It's easier to mock than to mirror. But here's the truth. Envy is not your fault. It's not your responsibility to dim yourself to make others feel safe. But it is your reality to navigate strategically, compassionately, and without apology. Because while envy may be natural, it doesn't have to dictate your path. Smart people break the unspoken rule. Most workplaces have two sets of rules. The official ones, the ones you find in HR manuals, and the unofficial ones. These are the invisible codes everyone's supposed to understand, but no one dares to say out loud. And this is where smart people often stumble, not because they're socially unaware, but because they take the system at face value. They believe in merit, in logic, in speaking up when something doesn't make sense. And that's exactly what makes them dangerous. Let me explain. The unspoken rules in many offices go like this. Don't work too hard, it makes others look bad. Don't question bad ideas too early, it makes you seem arrogant. Don't skip the happy hour, it makes you not a team player. Don't offer solutions too fast, it makes people feel dumb. You're not told these things. You discover them by violating them. And once you do, the social temperature changes. You thought skipping a Friday outing was no big deal, but now people say you're distant. You offered an efficient fix in a meeting and suddenly your manager feels challenged. You avoided office gossip and now you're seen as hard to connect with. What's happening here isn't about logic, it's about emotional equilibrium. You've disrupted the group's self-image. And no one likes to feel inadequate next to someone who's just quietly doing their job well. This is why smart people often feel blindsided. They weren't trying to rebel. They were just being themselves. But in a culture built on soft agreements, logic can be mistaken for judgment and clarity for criticism. Machiavelli would call this a violation of the theater. The workplace, like any kingdom, is a stage. People play roles: the mentor, the underdog, the nice guy. And when you step in without picking a role, you throw the whole cast off balance. Suddenly, the play doesn't work anymore. And the cast wants you gone, not because you're bad, but because you broke the script. The wisdom of hiding your intelligence. It sounds backwards, doesn't it? That in a world obsessed with performance, you'd have to hide the very thing that makes you valuable. But in many cases, that's exactly what the wisest people do not, because they're ashamed of their intelligence, but because they understand its impact. Machiavelli once advised leaders to appear less capable than they truly are. Not to deceive for power, but to preserve it. Because the moment others see your full strength, they begin to calculate how to contain it. This isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. In a group setting, especially one where status is fragile, displaying raw intelligence is like dropping a stone in a still pond. The ripples reach everyone, and not all of them welcome the disturbance. So the wisest among us learn to dial it down, to ask questions they already know the answers to share credit even when they carry the weight, to offer insights as gentle nudges, not declarations. This isn't manipulation, it's calibration. Because influence isn't about showing off, it's about staying in the room long enough to make a difference. And sometimes that means blending in, not shrinking but softening, not dimming your mind, but shielding it from unnecessary fire. Think of it like this: a flashlight is useful in the dark, but if you shine it directly into someone's eyes, they'll turn away. Not because they hate light, but because they weren't ready. Your intelligence is the same. It's a tool. And like any tool, its value depends on how, when, and where it's used. So no, you don't need to play dumb. But you do need to play smart. Because the goal isn't just to be brilliant. It's to be brilliant in a way that doesn't provoke the wrong reactions. That's not betrayal. That's strategy. The quiet mind makes the loudest noise. There's something unsettling about someone who doesn't talk much, but clearly sees everything. In most workplaces, people are comfortable with the loud ones. The ones who rant, gossip, self-promote. They're predictable. You know where they stand. You can feel their ego, their insecurity, their ambition. But the quiet ones, the ones who don't overshare, who listen more than they speak, they become an emotional Rorschach test people project onto them whatever they fear the most. He's probably judging me. She's too good to be here. Who does he think he is? Just sitting there so calm. None of this is based on facts. It's projection. And projection is one of the brain's oldest defense mechanisms, because silence isn't neutral. In insecure spaces, it becomes threatening, especially when paired with competence. If you're smart and quiet, people assume you're planning something. If you're composed under pressure, they wonder what you're hiding. If you don't laugh at the office drama, They think you're looking down on them. You're not. You're just different. But different doesn't feel safe in systems built on sameness. Machiavelli understood this. He warned rulers never to allow someone in their court who was perceived as too clever, too still, too unreadable. Why? Because power thrives on predictability, and people fear what they cannot predict. This is why the smart, quiet employee often becomes the scapegoat. Not because they've done anything wrong, but because their silence invites imagination. And imagination, fueled by insecurity, creates enemies where there are none. So what's the answer? Should you speak more? Blend in? Force small talk? Not necessarily. But be aware, in emotionally immature environments, your presence alone may feel like a confrontation. And when you refuse to play the social theater, others will rewrite the script around you, casting you as the villain without a line. Not because you threatened them, but because you reminded them they're pretending. How to survive without shrinking yourself. Let's be clear, the goal isn't to pretend. It's not about hiding who you are or diluting your brilliance to appease others. That's not strategy, that's self-abandonment, and it never ends well. The real question is, how do you stay true to yourself in a system that misreads your truth? The first answer is, choose your environments carefully. Not every workplace deserves your mind. If the culture is built on image over substance, popularity over performance, gossip over growth, you won't win by fighting harder. You'll win by walking away. Smart people often make the mistake of thinking they can fix broken systems. But Machiavelli would say, don't try to change the court, change the kingdom. Align your value with environments that reward depth, not theater. The second answer, build relationships strategically. You don't need to be friends with everyone, but you do need allies. People who recognize your integrity, who see your competence as an asset, not a threat. This doesn't mean manipulating people, it means investing where connection is possible. Even one strong alliance can protect you from the collective discomfort your presence may trigger. Third, communicate your intent, even if they misinterpret your energy. You may be quiet, but that doesn't mean you're cold. Let people know you care about the mission, the team, the culture, even if you express it differently. And finally, stay grounded in your self-worth. The more solid you are internally, the less reactive you'll be externally. Not every cold shoulder deserves your attention. Not every exclusion is about you. And not every compliment withheld is a sign you're unappreciated. Your value does not decrease in rooms that can't recognize it. You're not here to impress. You're here to express, to build, to contribute, to grow. And if you do that with integrity, even in the face of misunderstanding, you win something more important than popularity. You win freedom. Freedom to be intelligent without apology. To be quiet without suspicion. To be excellent without compromise. Closing the sharp edge of intelligence. Intelligence, in its purest form, is not about being right. It's about seeing clearly. And that clarity, when placed in a system built on comfort, conformity, and unspoken rules, can cut like a knife. Not because it intends harm, but because it makes people see what they'd rather avoid. And that's the paradox. You were told intelligence was a gift, that if you developed your skills, stayed humble, did the work, doors would open. What they didn't tell you is that your intelligence might threaten the very people holding those doors. That your quiet competence might be read as arrogance. That your clarity might be seen as criticism. That your presence without saying a word might make others question theirs. But here's the truth. This isn't a reason to dim your light. It's a reason to learn how to direct it. Because intelligence, like a blade, is neutral. It can wound or it can protect. It can isolate or it can liberate depending on how you wield it. So don't shrink. But don't swing wildly either. Master your presence. Read the room. Speak less when silence teaches more. Speak more when silence becomes a cage. Find the places where your mind is welcomed, not weaponized. Where your difference is a contribution, not a complication. And when those places feel rare, remember this. You are not alone. There are others like you, people who think deeply, feel carefully, and walk quietly. Not because they lack confidence, but because they've outgrown the performance. So keep your edge, but carry it with grace. Because the world needs more people who can see clearly and still choose compassion. And if that's you, then you're not just smart. You're powerful. And power, when guided by wisdom, doesn't need applause. It just needs direction.